Charlie Cross Morrison made 3 mistakes in his life. Mistake number 1, joining the Ku Klux Klan in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, 1943. He was 19 years old, angry at the world, looking for someone to blame. The Klan gave him answers, wrong answers, dangerous answers. Mistake number 2, killing State Trooper Daniel Richardson outside Valdosta, Georgia, August 1951. Charlie had been running moonshine, got pulled over, panicked, and put 2 bullets in the trooper's chest. They caught him 3 days later. The judge gave him death by electric chair. Charlie was 27 years old and had 3 months to live. But mistake number 3, that's the one that killed him faster. February 11th, 1952. Fresh out of a prison break, 6 days on the run, desperate, armed, dangerous. Charlie needed money, needed it fast, so he walked into a dress shop in Harlem, saw a well-dressed black woman alone, figured it'd be easy, pulled his gun and said, "Empty the register or I empty your head." The woman looked at him, calm, almost pitiful, and said 5 words that should have made Charlie run. "You just made a terrible mistake." Her name was Mayme Johnson, and in exactly 4 hours and 23 minutes, her husband would walk into that store with a straight razor and teach Charlie Morrison what happens when you touch the Queen of Harlem. The newspapers called it self-defense. Harlem called it justice. Charlie Morrison? He didn't call anything. February 11th, 1952, 10:23 in the morning. Charlie had been out of prison for exactly 6 days. He'd escaped during a transfer between facilities, jumped from a moving prison bus when the guards stopped to deal with another inmate who'd started a fight as a distraction. 3 men escaped that morning. 2 were recaptured within 12 hours. Charlie Morrison made it all the way to New York City with $7 in his pocket, a guard's stolen jacket, and absolutely no plan beyond running as far north as possible. 6 days of riding freight trains, hiding in rail yards, hitchhiking on back roads, sleeping in barns and abandoned buildings. 6 days without proper food, stealing what he could, drinking cheap whiskey to steady his nerves and quiet the voice in his head that kept saying he was going to die, either on the run or in Georgia's electric chair. By the time he stumbled into New York's Penn Station on February 10th, Charlie was exhausted, filthy, half-drunk, and desperate. He didn't know New York, had never been further north than Virginia. The city was overwhelming, too many people, too much noise, buildings so tall they blocked out the sky. Charlie had planned to steal enough money for a bus ticket to Canada, maybe $500, enough to disappear properly into Montreal or Toronto, start over with a new name in a country where Georgia's death warrant couldn't reach him. He spent his first night in New York sleeping in a subway station, woke up shivering and sick from withdrawal, and went looking for an easy score, a place with cash, somewhere he could get in and out quick before anyone realized what was happening. That's when Charlie made his fatal navigation error. He'd gotten lost trying to find Midtown, ended up on a subway line he didn't understand, got off at 125th Street because it sounded important, and found himself walking through streets where every face he saw was black. Store signs and windows were for black businesses. The music coming from open doors was different. Everything felt foreign and dangerous. Charlie's racist brain told him to get out immediately. This was enemy territory. He shouldn't be here. But then he saw Mayme's dress shop. The storefront looked prosperous, well-maintained, nice dresses in the window that probably cost serious money, the kind of place that would have cash in the register. And here's what Charlie's Klan-corrupted thinking told him. A dress shop in a black neighborhood, run by black people, would be an easy target. Women here wouldn't fight back against someone like him. That's what the Klan had taught him for 9 years, and that's what he believed. Charlie was about to learn how catastrophically wrong that belief was. Mayme Johnson was 41 years old in 1952. She'd been married to Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson for 13 years. She'd grown up in North Carolina, moved to Harlem during the Great Migration, worked as a seamstress before opening her dress shop in 1948 with money Bumpy had provided. The shop wasn't just a business, it was Mayme's kingdom. Her space, the one place in Harlem where she wasn't Bumpy Johnson's wife, but was instead Mrs. Mayme Johnson, businesswoman and entrepreneur. The shop was empty that morning, except for Mayme. Her assistant hadn't arrived yet. The first customers usually came around 11. Mayme was alone in the back room doing inventory, checking which fabrics needed reordering, making notes in her ledger with the careful handwriting of someone who'd taught herself to read as an adult. That's when the bell above the front door chimed. Mayme looked up, expecting her assistant. Instead, she saw a white man in a filthy, stolen jacket stumble in, looking around with the wild eyes of someone who'd been running for days, his hand inside his coat in a way that Mayme recognized immediately. She'd been married to a gangster for 13 years. She knew what a man looked like when he was carrying a gun and working up the courage to use it. Charlie walked toward the back room, saw Mayme standing there, saw a well-dressed black woman, alone, vulnerable, saw what he thought was an easy target. He pulled out the gun, a Colt M1911 semi-automatic pistol he'd stolen from an Army surplus store in Philadelphia 3 days ago. The gun was old, poorly maintained, probably left over from the war. Charlie had stolen it because it looked intimidating, not because he knew anything about firearms maintenance. His hand was shaking from 6 days of alcohol withdrawal and fear, but the gun was steady enough to make his intention clear. "Empty the register," Charlie said, his voice tight and raw. "Right now. Don't make me ask twice." Mayme looked at him, didn't move toward the register, didn't scream, didn't do any of the things Charlie expected. She just looked at him with an expression that Charlie couldn't quite read. Not fear, not anger, something else. Something that almost looked like pity? "You're not from here," Mayme said quietly. Her voice was calm, steady, like she was commenting on the weather. "I said empty the register." Charlie's voice cracked. He was used to people being afraid of him. The gun usually made people scared. This woman was looking at him like he was a child having a tantrum. "I heard you," Mayme said. She still hadn't moved. "I'm just trying to understand. You're lost, aren't you? You don't know where you are?" Charlie felt his anger rising. "I know exactly where—" "You're in Harlem," Mayme interrupted, "on Lenox Avenue. And you walked into my shop. You pulled a gun on me." She paused, tilted her head slightly. "Do you know who I am?" Charlie didn't, and that ignorance was about to cost him everything. "I don't care who you are," he said, stepping closer, raising the gun. "You're about to be a dead woman if you don't—" "My name is Mayme Johnson. Does that name mean anything to you?" It didn't. Charlie had been in prison for months. Before that, he'd been running moonshine in Georgia and Alabama. He didn't know Harlem, didn't know the names that mattered here, didn't understand what Mayme was trying to tell him. "I don't care what your name is. Get the money now, or I swear to God I'll—" That's when Mayme said the 5 words that should have made Charlie run. "You just made a terrible mistake." Her voice didn't change, didn't get louder, didn't get threatening. She said it like she was informing him of a simple fact, like telling someone they'd stepped in dog shit on the sidewalk. Unfortunate, but not her problem to solve. Charlie laughed, nervous laughter that didn't sound confident even to his own ears. "Yeah? What kind of mistake?" Mayme looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked past him, not running, walking, calmly walked to the front of the shop and turned the open sign to closed, locked the front door, drew the shade down over the window. Charlie watched, confused. "What are you doing?" "Buying you time," Mayme said simply. "A few hours at least. After that, well, we'll see." Then she walked to the telephone on the counter and made a call. Charlie could have stopped her, should have stopped her, but he was too confused by her behavior to react quickly enough. Mayme dialed, waited. Someone picked up. "It's me," she said quietly.
I need you to tell him that the roses need watering. The shop closed early today." She hung up, turned back to Charlie, who was staring at her like she'd lost her mind. "What the hell was that?" Charlie demanded. "Who did you just call?" "Small's Paradise," Mayme said. "That's a nightclub about 6 blocks from here. I left a message for my husband." Something cold twisted in Charlie's stomach. "Your husband?" "Ellsworth Johnson," Mayme said, watching Charlie's face carefully now, "though most people call him Bumpy." The name didn't register with Charlie. He had no idea who Bumpy Johnson was, no idea that he'd just taken hostage the wife of the most dangerous man in Harlem, no idea that in neighborhoods from 110th Street to 155th Street, from the East River to the Hudson, there were exactly 3 rules everyone knew. Rule 1, don't steal from Bumpy's people. Rule 2, don't disrespect Bumpy's territory. Rule 3, don't ever touch Bumpy's wife. Charlie had just broken Rule 3. "I don't care who your husband is," Charlie said, trying to sound tough. "He shows up here, I'll shoot him too. Now get the money or what? You'll shoot me? Then what? You think you're walking out of this shop alive after that? You think Harlem will let you?" Charlie grabbed her arm, hard enough to bruise. "Listen, lady, I've killed before. I'll do it again. Your husband, whoever he is, he's just another—" The sound of sirens interrupted him. Charlie's head snapped toward the front of the shop. Through a gap in the shade, he could see police cars pulling up outside. 3 cars, 6 cops climbing out, drawing weapons, taking positions. "You called the cops?" Charlie's voice rose with panic. "No," Mayme said simply, "but someone saw you walk in here with a gun. Harlem looks out for its own." The next 4 hours played out like a nightmare that Charlie couldn't wake up from. The police surrounded the building. A negotiator arrived, started talking through the locked door, trying to establish communication. Charlie dragged Mayme to the front, pressed the gun against her head, shouted through the door that he'd kill her if they tried to come in. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was what was happening outside. By noon, approximately 200 people had gathered on Lenox Avenue. They didn't look like a mob. They looked like the neighborhood. Mothers with children, old men in suits, young people in work clothes, store owners who'd closed their shops to come see what was happening. They filled the street, standing between the police and Mayme's shop, not threatening, not violent, just present. The police tried to move them back. Standard procedure, clear the area, give the officers room to work. The crowd didn't move. "Folks, you need to clear this street," one sergeant kept saying. "This is an active hostage situation. You're interfering with police operations." An elderly woman near the front, wearing a church hat and carrying a Bible, looked at the sergeant like he was simple. "We're not interfering, officer. We're witnessing." "Ma'am, I'm ordering you to—" "This is our neighborhood," another voice called out, a man in a butcher's apron. "That's Mrs. Johnson in there. We're not leaving until we know she's safe." More police arrived. A police captain named William Henderson showed up, took one look at the crowd, and realized this wasn't a situation that could be solved with force. You couldn't arrest 200 people, couldn't drag them away without starting a riot. And Henderson had been working in Harlem long enough to understand the politics here were complicated. He'd taken money from Bumpy Johnson for years. Not a lot, just enough to look the other way when Bumpy's policy runners made their rounds. Just enough to make sure Bumpy got a phone call if there was going to be a raid. It was how things worked, and Henderson had made peace with it, because Bumpy, unlike other criminals, actually kept the neighborhood safer. Less violence, less chaos. As long as Bumpy was in charge, Harlem was manageable. But this was different. Inside the shop, Charlie was deteriorating. The reality of his situation was sinking in. He'd taken a hostage, cops outside, no way out. And this woman, Mayme, she wasn't crying or begging. She was just waiting, calm, like she knew something Charlie didn't. "Why aren't you scared?" Charlie finally asked her around 2 p.m. They'd been there for almost 4 hours. Mayme looked at him. Because this ends the same way no matter what you do. The only question is whether you're smart enough to surrender before my husband gets here. You told me I don't care about your— You should, Mayme interrupted. Bumpy Johnson is the most powerful man in Harlem. He's killed men for less than this, and you grabbed his wife, put a gun to her head, in his own neighborhood. She paused. Let that sink in. Charlie, right? That's what the police said your name is? Charlie Morrison, ex-KKK, escaped convict, on death row for killing a state trooper. Charlie's eyes widened. How do you— The negotiator told me. Thought it might help me understand who I was dealing with. Mayme's voice was almost gentle now. Charlie, you're already a dead man. Georgia wants to execute you. You've got maybe 3 months before they strap you into that electric chair. So you've got nothing to lose, right? That's what you're thinking. Charlie didn't respond. His jaw was tight. But here's what you're not thinking about, Mayme continued quietly. There are different ways to die. Georgia's electric chair? That's quick. 2,000 volts. You're gone in seconds. But my husband— She paused. He's not quick. He's patient and creative, and if you hurt me, if you put one more bruise on my arm, he will make sure your last hours on earth are so much worse than anything Georgia could do to you. You're bluffing. Am I? Mayme looked at him steadily. You want to find out. At 3:42 p.m., the phone in the shop rang. Charlie jumped, stared at it. Don't answer that. It kept ringing. That's going to be the negotiator, Mayme said. You should answer, hear what they have to say. Charlie kept the gun on Mayme with one hand, picked up the phone with the other. Morrison, this is Captain Henderson. How's Mrs. Johnson? She's alive, Charlie said. She stays that way if you give me what I want. And what do you want? A car, safe passage to Canada, and— I can't do that, Morrison. Then she dies. Morrison, listen to me. Henderson's voice changed, got quieter, more urgent. You need to let Mrs. Johnson go right now, not because of the law, because her husband just arrived. Charlie felt his blood turn to ice. What? Bumpy Johnson is here. He's standing in the street. And Morrison? Henderson paused. I've worked in Harlem for 15 years. I've seen what this man does to people who cross him. You're already on death row. Don't make your last days on earth worse than they have to be. Let her go. Surrender. We'll get you back to Georgia. At least that way it's fast. You're bluffing. Look out the window. Charlie moved to the shade, keeping the gun pressed against Mayme's head, and peered through a gap. The crowd had parted down the middle, creating a path from the street to the shop door. And walking down that path, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who owned every inch of ground he stepped on, was Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. He was 45 years old, 5 feet 9 inches tall, not a big man physically, but the way he moved, the way every single person in that crowd stepped back as he passed, made him seem enormous. He wore a gray suit, perfectly tailored, a fedora, shoes polished like mirrors. He looked like a businessman heading to a meeting, except for his face. Charlie had seen that expression before, on the faces of men in prison who'd killed so many times that murder didn't even register as significant anymore. Cold, empty, like looking into the eyes of a shark. Bumpy stopped about 10 feet from the shop door, reached into his jacket. Every cop tensed, hands moved toward guns. Bumpy didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a straight razor, the old-fashioned kind, the kind barbers used, the kind that could shave a man's face smooth or open his throat from ear to ear. He opened the razor with a practiced flick of his wrist. Click. That sound carried across the silent street, metal on metal, sharp, final. Bumpy looked directly at the window where he knew Morrison was watching. Then he turned to Captain Henderson. His voice was quiet, but in the silence of that street, everyone heard every word. "Captain, I'm going to give you some advice. In about 2 minutes, I'm going through that door. What happens after that, you don't want your officers to witness. You don't want them writing reports about what they saw. You don't want them testifying in court. Mr. Johnson, this is a police matter. I can't just—" "You can," Bumpy interrupted. Still quiet, still calm. "You can tell your men to maintain a perimeter, but hold position. You can tell them that if they hear anything, they wait 30 seconds before entering. 30 seconds, Captain. That's all I need." "Johnson, if I let you—" "You're not letting me do anything." Bumpy's eyes locked onto Henderson's. "I'm telling you what's going to happen. You can have your men here when it happens, and they'll spend the next year dealing with paperwork and investigations. Or you can be smart. Keep them at a distance. Let me handle my business. And when it's over, Morrison comes out alive and ready to go back to Georgia. Everybody wins." Henderson looked at the crowd. 200 witnesses. Then he looked at Bumpy, made a calculation that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with survival. "Officers," Henderson called out, his voice tight, "fall back to the end of the block. Maintain visual on the building, but do not approach unless I give the order." "Captain, we can't just—" "That's an order!" The cops retreated, slowly, reluctantly. Not completely gone, but far enough that they couldn't see clearly through the shop's windows. Far enough that they could later claim they didn't witness what happened next. The crowd didn't move. Bumpy walked to the shop door, tried the handle, locked. He stepped back, called out toward the window, voice still conversational. "Morrison, you've got 2 choices. Choice 1, you open this door right now. Let my wife walk out, unharmed, not a hair on her head touched. You do that, I let Captain Henderson arrest you. You go back to Georgia. They execute you clean, quick. You don't suffer." Bumpy paused. Let that sink in. "Choice 2, I come through this door myself. And before you go back to Georgia, you spend a few days in a Harlem hospital wishing you'd chosen option 1. The doctors will keep you alive, barely, long enough for Georgia to come get you. But you'll spend every second of those days understanding exactly what happens when someone forgets the rules." Inside the shop, Charlie was shaking. The gun trembled in his hand. "He's bluffing," Charlie whispered to Mayme. He can't just—" "He's not bluffing," Mayme said quietly. "And Charlie, listen to me. You're a dead man already. Georgia's going to execute you whether you surrender now or in a week. The only question is what happens between now and then. Let me go. Take the easy way, please." Charlie looked at her, looked at the door, looked at the gun in his hand. He thought about Alabama, about the Klan meetings where they talked about superiority, about keeping people in their place with fear and violence. He thought about how easy it was supposed to be, how someone like him was supposed to be untouchable. He thought about how catastrophically wrong all of that had been. "I can't go back," Charlie said. His voice broke. "I can't. That chair—" "You're going back either way," Mayme said. "But you can go back in one piece. That's the choice." Outside, Bumpy was done waiting. He took 3 steps back from the door. Then he ran forward and kicked it just beside the lock. The door exploded inward, wood splintering, lock mechanism ripping free from the frame. Charlie spun toward the sound, tried to aim the gun at the doorway. Bumpy was already inside, moving faster than a man his age should move. The razor was open in his hand, glinting in the dim light. "No!" Charlie screamed, pulled the trigger. Click. The Colt 1911 jammed. The poorly maintained, stolen Army surplus pistol that Charlie had never properly cleaned or checked failed at the worst possible moment. The slide was frozen halfway back, a spent cartridge stuck in the ejection port. Charlie stared at the useless gun in his hand for one frozen second. That second cost him everything.
Bumpy closed the distance in 2 steps. His left hand shot out like a striking snake, grabbed Charlie's wrist, twisted with brutal efficiency until Charlie screamed, and the jammed pistol clattered to the floor. His right hand, the one holding the razor, came up in one smooth, practiced motion. What happened next took less than 8 seconds, but would be retold in Harlem for the next 70 years. Bumpy pushed Charlie back against the wall, held him there with one hand, while the razor opened a precise line across Charlie's throat. Not deep, not the carotid, not a killing cut, a message cut. The razor moved with the precision of a surgeon or a barber. One clean line from the left side of Charlie's jaw across to the right, about 2 inches below his chin, deep enough to bleed heavily, deep enough to hurt like hell, deep enough to scar permanently, but not deep enough to kill. "That's for putting your hands on my wife," Bumpy said quietly. His voice was calm, professional, like he was explaining something to a particularly slow student. Charlie clutched his throat. Blood poured between his fingers, hot and sticky. He could feel his pulse hammering against his palms as he tried to stop the bleeding. His eyes were wide of shock and terror and pain. Bumpy stepped back, wiped the razor blade on Charlie's stolen jacket, closed it with a practiced flick, and slipped it back into his pocket. Then he turned to Mayme. "You hurt?" "No, I'm fine." "Good." Bumpy turned back to Charlie, who'd slid down the wall into a sitting position, both hands pressed against his throat, eyes locked on Bumpy's face with the desperate focus of an animal caught in a trap. "Morrison." Bumpy's voice was still quiet. "Look at me." Charlie looked up, blood running down his forearms, dripping onto the floor. "You came to Harlem today thinking it'd be easy. You got lost, ended up in a neighborhood you didn't understand, walked into a black woman's shop and figured you could take what you wanted because you had a gun and she didn't. You thought everything the Klan taught you about being superior would protect you. Thought those tattoos made you powerful." Bumpy crouched down, eye level with Charlie now. "You were wrong about all of that. And that cut on your throat, that's your lesson. That's what you remember for however many days you've got left. You remember the day you learned that hate isn't armor, a gun isn't power, and some women have husbands who walk through police lines to protect them." Bumpy stood, walked to the door, called out toward the street. "Captain Henderson, Morrison's ready for arrest. He needs medical attention. Cut on his throat. Superficial, but it's bleeding pretty good. He'll live long enough to get back to Georgia." Henderson appeared in the doorway, 2 officers behind him. They looked at Charlie bleeding on the floor, looked at Bumpy standing there calm and collected, looked at the jammed pistol lying in the corner. Henderson's eyes moved to a decorative letter opener on Mayme's desk, a brass piece shaped like a small dagger that Mayme kept for opening mail. "What happened here, Mr. Johnson?" "Morrison tried to attack my wife with that letter opener when I came through the door," Bumpy said, pointing. "I disarmed him, had to defend her. Things got physical." Henderson looked at the letter opener, looked at Charlie's throat. The story was weak, everyone in that room knew it, but Henderson was smart enough to understand what Bumpy was offering him. A story that explained the blood without requiring anyone to admit what had really happened. "I see," Henderson said slowly. "And you're certain that's what occurred?" "Absolutely certain," Bumpy said. Henderson turned to Mayme. "Mrs. Johnson, can you confirm your husband's account?" Mayme didn't hesitate. "That's exactly what happened, Captain. Charlie grabbed that letter opener and came at me. My husband stopped him. Thank God he arrived when he did." Henderson nodded, turned to his officers. "You heard them. Morrison attacked Mrs. Johnson with a weapon. Mr. Johnson intervened in defense of his wife. Get Morrison to Harlem Hospital, have the doctors patch him up, then contact Georgia State Prison. They've got a death row inmate to pick up." 2 officers moved forward, hauled Charlie to his feet, started dragging him toward the door. Charlie was crying now, from pain, from fear,
from the crushing realization that he'd nearly died and that only Bumpy Johnson's decision to let him live had saved him. As they pulled him past, Bumpy spoke one last time. His voice was quiet enough that only Charlie could hear. "Morrison, you've got maybe 3 months before Georgia straps you into that chair. And every single day until then, when you see that scar in the mirror, you remember what you learned in Harlem. You remember that you came here thinking hate made you strong, and you met someone who showed you what real strength looks like. You remember that all those years in the Klan, all those nights burning crosses and telling yourself you were superior, all of it was a lie. And when they flip that switch in Reidsville, your last thought is going to be about the day a black man in a suit moved faster than you could blink and taught you the lesson you should have learned years ago." Charlie was dragged out into the bright afternoon sunlight. The outside crowd erupted in applause, not bloodthirsty cheering, just relief. One of their own was safe. Bumpy had done what Bumpy always did, protected Harlem's people. Inside the shop, Bumpy turned to Mayme, really looked at her for the first time since entering. "You sure you're okay? He didn't hurt you?" "I'm sure," Mayme said. Then she smiled slightly. "I told him he'd made a terrible mistake." Bumpy actually laughed, a short, genuine sound. "I bet you did." He pulled her into a hug, just stood there for a moment, holding his wife, letting the adrenaline fade, letting himself feel the fear he'd been suppressing for the last 4 hours. "You know there's going to be questions," Mayme said quietly against her shoulder. "Henderson knows better. But the story, Bumpy, anyone with eyes can see that wound wasn't made by a letter opener. Doesn't matter what they can see, matters what they can prove." Bumpy pulled back slightly, looked at her face. "Henderson's been on my payroll for 15 years. He's not going to start making problems now. The cut looks bad, but it's clean. It'll heal. Morrison will have a scar, but he'll live long enough for Georgia to execute him properly. That's all anyone needs to know. What if he talks? What if he tells people what really happened? Who's going to believe an escaped death row inmate with KKK tattoos?" Bumpy smiled. "Especially when that inmate is saying a 45-year-old man in a suit moved faster than he could react. They'll think he's trying to save face, making excuses for why he failed." Mayme shook her head, but she was smiling now. "One of these days, your luck's going to run out. Maybe, but not today." The story of what happened at Mayme's dress shop on February 11th, 1952 became legend in Harlem. The details got exaggerated over the years, as stories do. Some versions said Bumpy kicked the door completely off its hinges. Some said the razor cut was so precise it looked like a surgical incision. Some said the crowd outside was 1,000 people strong. But the core truth remained constant, passed down through generations. An ex-Klan member walked into Harlem thinking he could victimize a black woman because he had a gun and she didn't. He got lost in a neighborhood he didn't understand, chose the wrong target, and learned a lesson that cost him a permanent scar and then cost him his life 3 months later when Georgia executed him as scheduled. Charlie Morrison went back to Georgia on February 12, 1952. The cut on his throat was stitched up at Harlem Hospital before the Georgia State Troopers came to collect him. 19 stitches. The wound healed over the next 6 weeks, but the scar tissue was thick and ropey, a white line across his throat that he saw every morning when they brought him to the showers at Reidsville State Prison. The other death row inmates asked about it. Charlie would tell them different stories. Got in a fight during the escape, cut himself climbing through a window, got attacked by a guard. He never told the truth. He never said, "I threatened Bumpy Johnson's wife, and Bumpy Johnson let me live just long enough to make it to the electric chair," because the truth made him sound weak, made him sound like a fool, made him admit that everything the Klan had taught him about superiority and power was a lie, that he'd gone to Harlem expecting an easy target and instead found someone who made him understand what real power looked like. On May 15, 1952, at 12:01 a.m., Charlie Cross Morrison was executed by electrocution at Reidsville State Prison. He was 28 years old. His last meal was fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and cornbread. He declined to make a final statement. The guards who walked him to the chair later said that as they were strapping him in, Morrison kept touching the scar on his throat over and over, like he was trying to tell himself something or remember something. One guard asked him about it. "That scar from your escape?" Morrison looked at him, smiled sadly. "No, that's from when I learned my lesson. Too bad it came too late." Then they put the hood over his head, and Charlie Morrison left this world carrying the memory of a February afternoon in Harlem when he'd grabbed the wrong woman and met the wrong man.
Bumpy Johnson never faced charges for what happened that day. Captain Henderson's report stated that Morrison had attempted to attack Mrs. Johnson with a letter opener, and that Mr. Johnson had acted in defense of his wife, using reasonable force to disarm the assailant. No one contradicted that story. Not the cops, who had been positioned far enough away that they couldn't see clearly. Not the 200 witnesses in the street who knew the code. What happens in Harlem stays in Harlem. Not Morrison himself, who understood that telling the truth would just make him sound like he was making excuses. And Mayme? She reopened her dress shop the next morning, business as usual. The only visible sign that anything had happened was a new door. Bumpy had kicked the old one clean off its frame, and replacing it took a carpenter 3 days. But other than that, everything looked the same. Except customers came in all day, not just to shop, to check on her, to tell her they'd been in the crowd outside, to say how glad they were she was safe, to ask if she needed anything. And Mayme thanked them all, thanked them for being there, for being witnesses, for being the kind of community that looked out for its own. Because that's what the story was really about, underneath all the drama and violence. It was about a community that understood. When someone from outside comes in and tries to hurt one of theirs, the whole neighborhood responds. That protection isn't just about one dangerous man with a razor. It's about 200 people standing in the street saying, "Not here, not today." It's about cops who understand that some situations can't be solved by the book. It's about unwritten rules that everyone knows. The most important one being, you don't touch another man's wife. Charlie Morrison made 3 mistakes in his life. The first 2 got him sentenced to death. The third one just made the wait shorter. He spent his last 93 days in a cell at Reidsville State Prison, the scar on his throat a daily reminder of the afternoon he learned that hate isn't strength, that a gun isn't power, and that all the lies the Klan had fed him for 9 years couldn't protect him from the truth. And the truth was simple. In Harlem, 1952, Bumpy Johnson had a whole neighborhood behind him. That's why he was untouchable. That's why Mayme could tell an armed, desperate man, "You just made a terrible mistake," and mean it. And that's why, even 70 years later, old-timers in Harlem still tell stories about the day an outsider learned the hard way. You can walk into Harlem, but if you disrespect it, you won't walk out the same. And sometimes, you don't walk out at all. If this story hit you the way it hit everyone who lived through it, hit that subscribe button right now. We're telling the Bumpy Johnson stories that history books won't touch. The moments when Harlem's protector showed the world what real power looks like. Drop a like if you think Bumpy showed the right kind of restraint. He could have done worse. And drop a comment. Do you think Charlie Morrison understood the lesson? Or did he die still believing the lies? Tomorrow's video drops at noon, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happened when Bumpy Johnson walked into Lucky Luciano's office unarmed and walked out owning half of Harlem. Remember, respect isn't given, it's earned. And in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson earned his every single day.